There we go. We're going to talk this morning in our first lesson about why we act the fool sometimes. I want to make a preliminary comment here. Anytime you're dealing with somebody who's acting like a fool, chances are 98% of the time it's not your fault. I totally subscribe to the idea that hurt people hurt other people. Sad people hurt other people. People who are angry in themselves hurt other people. And so one of the things you got to do is be sure that you kind of understand that the fool you're dealing with is dealing with his or her own issues at some very deep-seated level. And most people don't have the courage to go in themselves. Most people would rather point the finger out there and go, well, it's your fault, it's somebody else's fault, blame anything other than go in and go, it's me. And I think at the core of a good, steady inner peace is totally owning yourself and your responses. And while other people may be influenced, the primary thing you want to say is, it's me. It's me. And I don't need to be blaming other people. So when somebody starts picking on you and acting a fool in your life, don't worry about it. You probably didn't do anything wrong. Now, it's possible you did. And you need to be honest with yourself there. But just understand they're dealing with stuff in their own life. So let's run through some of those quickly. Some folks get impatient with different things in life. They're in a hurry for something to happen. And because it's not happening on their timetable, they start acting like a fool. That's just one of the ways it works. Despair. They get that sense of hopelessness, like something is never, ever, ever going to happen. I thought about Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And they thought, there's no way this old lady's going to have a baby for me. And they, in their hopelessness, they created a whole lot of problems through that one. Then we just get busy. We get distracted. We spread ourselves way too thin, which is really easy to do in our culture. And then there's just basic distractions, entertainment. Just there's a bazillion things. How many of you, if you wanted to fill your plate, couldn't fill your plate with stuff to do? All of us have more on our plate, and we got stuff trying to get on our plate. Now, I will give you this little aside, and I heard this from Steve Harvey. He said, I'd complain about having my plate full, but I always wanted to eat. Let that one soak in just a moment. Would you really rather sit around with absolutely nothing to do and an empty plate? I'd like to find the nice balance between those two, but I don't want to go to the other extreme. And then we're just limited humans. I mean, we're finite. We say it all the time, but do we really realize what it means to be finite and limited? And we can't do everything. We can't be everything for everyone, and we can't accomplish everything we want to do. That's why you got to pick your priorities and do those kind of things. And sometimes, for reasons that we can't even explain, we just act a fool. We just woke up stupid one morning. That may just be the way to say it. There's no other way around it sometimes. So we're going to run through some things and I've got about 6 of these here. Times of suffering, pain. I'm talking about physical pain. It can be emotional pain. It will take us to our limits. When they teach the childbirth classes, one of the things they taught us years and years ago, and I suppose it has not changed, was they said, husbands, you're going to be in there with her, because they allow you to do that since the 70s. Don't believe a thing she says. Because in the middle of her contractions, she's going to say things she doesn't mean. And I'm like, okay, pain does that to you. And when you're talking to somebody who's really, really hurting, they will say some hateful, mean things sometimes because it just takes us beyond our limits and we don't know how to handle it. Our pilgrimage is not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. We're to take up our cross and follow Jesus. That suggests discomfort. We are to walk the straight and narrow road, which tells us it's a tough way. And sometimes we just get slap worn out. Our trials, though, they're not meaningless. We've got a reason for them. They're here to help us. It's just hard sometimes to engage the training because our current culture is so focused on entertainment, recreation, and having a pleasant, comfortable time. And that's like that you arrived then. No, you didn't. You just got lazy then. As another speaker I listen to says, the rush to comfort is just the rush to the grave. Let that one soak in also for a little bit. So we're going to look at our trials and we're going to be in these times of suffering and we're going to try to figure out, okay, what's God trying to teach me? And there's a plethora of lessons that you can learn from these. I'm not even going to try to list them. I'm just going to give you James 1, 2 through 4. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. You're in the training. That's where you wanted to be. Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. God is trying to grow us up. He is trying to take us from being beginner Christians. I like to say white belt Christians, use a karate term. And he's trying to take us through the yellow and the orange and the green and the blue and the purple all the way up to the brown and the black and then beyond the black also. And that's what all of this does. Now, times of despair. We'll spend a little more time here. We have those times where it's just hopeless. It is like, this is never going to work out. This is the end of the world. This is the end of my life. And it may be the end of my life as I know it. But I do have to remember those stories I've heard so many times where somebody comes to me and says, they just closed the plant. I just got laid off. This or that just happened. I don't have a clue what I'm going to do. My life's over. 6 weeks later, 6 months later, maybe a year later, they come back to you and go, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't happen and that wouldn't happen and I wouldn't be where I am today. And it's really super hard to see that when you're in the beginning of that process. It's really easy to see it when you're looking back on it. And it's easy to appreciate it when you're looking back on it. It's hard to appreciate it when you're looking forward into it. So you have Elijah running from Jezebel. Now he's just had the Mount Carmel victory. Now this is kind of neat. He has just gathered together all the false prophets and they tried to call fire down from their God. Nothing happened, And then he did call fire down from our God, which licked up the sacrifice and all the water and everything, and they destroyed all the false prophets. And Jezebel was really upset about that. And she says, I'm going to kill him. And so he's on the run for his life. He's out there in the desert now. And he says, it's enough now, O Lord. Take my life. He was in that hopeless, desperate situation where he said, there's nothing else to live for. It's all done. It's all over. And then he let his bad imagination get away from him. And this is what we all do it. We imagine the absolute worst. Now, that's not entirely wrong. The problem is we let it dominate. One of the little simple tools for managing stress is to first write down, this is the worst possible thing I can imagine happening. The next is, okay, how can I make it a little better? What are some steps I can do? And then it gives you a track to work on. The problem is when we imagine the worst possible thing and we let it dominate and control and paralyze us, we freeze in fear. That's where we get bad. So he's at the worst. His imagination gets away from him. He thinks he's the last prophet, the last faithful person in all of Israel. And if you go back and go 1 Kings 19 and read the whole story, he finds out that there are 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. But he thought he was the only one. And he thought it was just all over. And it wasn't over. It wasn't what he thought it was. And that's tough. But that's why we act the fool sometimes. Don't you know he looked back on that later and thought, oh man, how could I thought it was all over? So you look at your times of despair, and David understood what they were. He said, I'd have lost heart unless I'd believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord, notice, in the land of the living. So he says, wait on the Lord and be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Things aren't normally as bad as we think they are. Now, I hedged on you and said normally because we can all come up with a story somewhere where it was that bad. And it was the end. But what do we expect? It's appointed a man wants to die, right? And so, you get the cancer diagnosis and you think, oh no, life is over. Well, you may be going through a long, horrible struggle coming up to get through it, and you may live another 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We know those stories, right? And then we know cases where the person said, I just got this cancer diagnosis. Doctor said I got 6 weeks to live, and 5 weeks later they were dead. I just don't know which one's which. I don't know. And so I know that you have your times of despair. I know at some point we're all coming to our end, our last day. If we continually say, this is it, it's all over, one day we will be right. Now, I would rather be encouraging and say, wait a minute, there's a whole lot of days I'm going to be wrong, but one day I am going to be right. And that's just the way life works. So you learn to trust God absolutely, completely. He is infinite. We're finite. He knows what he's doing. He's weaving the tapestry together. He's got the big plan out there. I don't have it all figured out. And so you just wait on the Lord. And if you can do like Job, if he slays me yet, will I trust him? If it's my time to go, it's my time to go. What did I expect? I would never go? Well, obviously I'm going to go. Am I going to go today in a car wreck? Am I going to go today with an unexpected stroke? Am I going to live to be 123 and really be an aggravation to my grandkids? I don't know. Now, Madeline says I'm already an aggravation, which I think that is totally cool. We have a snarky humor that we love to share. So it's the training. It's all training. And it's about finding our strength in God. Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's not in man who walks. It's in us learning to rest in his power. So we have our times of despair. We got to combat them, and we do combat them. First, acknowledge it when you're feeling hopeless, and if you have someone you can talk to, this can be helpful. And just say, look, I feel hopeless. I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Just be honest about it, because denial is not going to get you anywhere. And when you have a friend that's saying that to you, just listen. Don't try to reason them out of it, because what they're doing is they're feeling. And you can't mess with feelings a whole lot with logic. The two just kind of, it's like AM and FM. They just don't line up real good. Matthew 4:4, we don't live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So what I want you to do is keep getting back into the Word, getting back in the Word, and look at people who went through their despair, like Elijah, and go, okay, it worked out okay for him. And incidentally, even if it is not going to work out okay in the more fleshly sense, and this is my time to leave this life, as long as I end up on the other side and hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, then it worked out okay, didn't it? Because isn't the whole goal to grow spiritually and get to heaven? So that would be victory. And then reflect on the past victories. I know I've said it, and I'm going to keep saying it because I really, really want to drive it in. You have survived every single thing life has thrown at you to this date. And some of us have been at places where we thought, I don't know how to go forward from here. And yet for some of us, those places were 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, where we said, I don't know how we'll ever go forward from here. And somehow we went forward. Somehow it worked out. And so look back on the past. Now don't get too nonchalant with the current situation. You want to be responsible. But don't forget everything you have survived. There's been so much. Number 3, we get into times of rebellion. We think we know better than God. We get smarter than God sometimes, right? It's so easy to go, well, I'm finite. I've only got 3 pounds of gray matter in my head, and God's got all eternity. And then something happens, and all of a sudden we're smarter than God. I think that's a little ironic. So Romans 9:20, Paul would write, excuse me, who are you, O man, who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me like this, will it? Hmm. We say, thou art the potter, I am the clay. That's that song, have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. Well, beautiful song, isn't it? And it's easy to sing. It's a little more difficult to live, isn't it? Jesus learned obedience, though. I know this is a little puzzling, and I can't tell you everything about how eternal deity came down into a body of flesh, though that's what we believe. And then he learned obedience, but Hebrews 5:8 says just exactly that. He learned obedience through the things he suffered. Now that's a direct New King James Version quote. I know that. And that's what, so he's learned obedience through the things he suffered. And so we're going to do the same thing. Instead of pushing back and rebelling and throwing a fit, which is the flesh's initial response, we're just going to do like Christ. He's in the garden. He's got Calvary in front of him. And it's not going to be a pleasant time. And if there was a way around it, he would like that. Who wouldn't? And he said, my Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. It's total submission over defiance. Because I know, and this is easy to say, I know his ways better than anything I will come up with. I can come up with some ways that short term look good, but he's looking long term and he knows. It's kind of like Megan and Chris, and they're dealing with Reese, and Reese thinks Reese knows what Reese wants because Reese is a sharp kid. But because they have a couple more years of experience, they know better. But he doesn't like it all the time. That's the way it works. Only Reese and his parents are a whole lot closer together than us and God. We're like, I can't get my arms far enough. And he knows way better. And so to learn just to surrender and submit and say, okay, Lord, I can't see what's coming, but I know you got this. That's that's tough. That's maturity there. So how are we going to guard against some of this rebellion? Well, let's hit probably 3, 4 ideas here. We're going to grow in humility. I am finite. It's not just a statement, it's a reality. I am finite. God is infinite. He knows what he's doing. Want to keep getting closer and closer to God, James 4:8. There's a lot we could say about that. We're going to make the choice. Galatians 5:24 says, those who are Christ have crucified the flesh. And so we're not going to let the flesh dominate. I know this flesh is going into the grave sooner or later. I know that. That's a fact. That's done. So let's make the choice to make the spiritual path work. Colossians 3, verse 1 and 2, that's where we set our mind on heaven, on things above. And then consider that rebellion's just an illusion, that I'm in control. I'm not in control. God's in control. And you're not in control, and Washington's not in control, and Elon Musk is not in control, and Bill Gates isn't in control, and go ahead and name all the billionaires. There's about 250 of them in the world now. It is an illusion. When the game's over, they all go out the same gate and stand in front of the judgment seat of Christ just like the rest of us. Nobody gets a pass on that. Sometimes we doubt God's love. That sneaks in on us. Satan loves it that when we do that. So we're in a hard time. And then we go, well, if he loves me, then why do I suffer? And the answer to suffering is multiple lessons in and of itself. What you cannot do is allow yourself to think because your life did not unfold as the way you dreamed it would when you were 16, 18, 21, whatever, that God doesn't like you. One of the things that puzzles me, and it happens, you go to the hospital, you visit somebody, they're in pain, they go, well, God must not like me. I'm like, what? Well, I'm in the hospital. I've got a kidney stone, or I've got gallbladder problems, or I've got this cancer diagnosis. God must not like me. No, that's what Satan wants you to think. That's not the way Christians need to think. We misunderstand what real love is. Real love is not that coddling. I'm going to put this bubble of protection around you, and nobody's ever going to say a bad word to you. They're never going to say anything mean to you, and nothing unpleasant that you don't enjoy is never ever going to happen to you. That's the problem with our society today. We got too many kids. I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'll keep it short. We got too many kids today who have had helicopter parents hovering over them the whole time, and anytime they get ready to skin their knee or do something that might be unpleasant, mom or dad's jumping in there like, oh, no, honey, don't do that. Okay, come back to our generation. Did you have a helmet and elbow pads and knee pads before you got to go out on your bicycle? You know, you came back with, we called it road rash, and mom put iodine on it. Remember how that felt? Oh, that was so cool and soothing, wasn't it? You know, and we got out there and we got hurt and we experienced life. And when we got in trouble, we got whooped. And when things went bad, we got lectured. And a whole lot of us grew up pretty good because mom understood what she was doing. She was raising kids. Her job wasn't to protect us from life, but to prepare us for life. And that's a tough one for parents. So in Hebrews 13, 5 and 6, we read that he will never desert us. He will never forsake us. And we can say confidently, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? It makes me think of Matthew 10:28, where he says, don't fear those who can kill the body, but after that, they can't do anything else to you. That's a hard one to get, isn't it? The body's disposable. It's already going to the grave. I want the focus on the spiritual. So what God does is he walks through the valley with us. Now I forget exactly which verse that is in Psalms 23. I think it's verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art, and what does it say? With me. He's with us. And that's what love does. He's the trainer. He's the coach. He's there with us the whole time. And if we can keep our focus, we'll be learning the lessons. So love doesn't shelter us from all the challenges. It gets us through them in a productive way. So you have to be really careful here with your selfish definition of what love looks like and a mature definition of what love looks like. And what love really looks like from the biblical point of view, to use the parental example again, is a spanking. It's discipline. It's punishment. And that's what the Bible teaches us. If you spare the rod, you spoil the child. Now, I don't think you have to spank in every case, personal opinion. There's a time when they're pretty young where the spanking is what they understand. And there's the time where they get older and go, can you just spank me and get it over with? And I'm like, okay, we're through spanking now, right? Now we're going to a little more grounding or whatever, taking the car keys. Nowadays you can take the cell phone, you can take the iPad, you can take the computer, you can turn the Wi-Fi off. Look at all the leverage parents have now. All we get to go is, you can't have the phone. Well, they didn't spend that much time on the phone anyway. Number 5, times when we doubt God's power. Satan loves this doubt too. We doubt his love. We doubt his power. We limit God to our perspective. The people I know and the people I deal with, they are limited. And it's a tendency for us to think of God in the way that we thought of our parents. I get how kids would do that. But at some point I got to get past that because my parents couldn't do everything. I worked with a lady once, and she had a daughter that was about 3, and you know how kids catch frogs, and she caught a frog, and the frog died, and she brings it to her mom and says, fix it. Well, of course, mama can't fix it, and the kid starts learning, oh, mama can't do everything. One definition of adulthood and maturity is when you realize the adults really don't know what they're doing anyway. That needs a little explanation, doesn't it? We'll leave that one alone for right now. So we forget God has all this power, and he does. We forget the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection of the dead, the body, the miracles, and all that stuff. And we just really, I don't know if God's really on my side or not. And it's all training. It's all training. I get that from James 1, verse 2, 3, and 4, where we count all joy and fall in various trials. So what we do is we end up focusing more on our own agenda. And we have them, don't we? You know, Sharon and I, we were dating, we were going to have a house and a picket fence and 2 cars and 4 kids and blah, blah, blah. You know how it goes. Well, that was a cute dream. I'm not going to say it was wrong. It was never realized. But, life unfolds the way life unfolds. You have your agenda, and then you live life. The problem is when we get so focused on our own agenda that if God's not in agreement with our agenda and blessing our agenda and working out our agenda for us, then we start wondering, does he really have the power the Bible says he has? And I put in parentheses there, our agenda is really just a sandcastle. Look at it. Just think. Some of the people of the past that we can still remember. Mark Twain was pretty awesome in writing, and he had a really clever wit. There were a lot of other people that were clever in writing and had a good wit too, and nobody knows who they are. We've had how many presidents? I lose count. We've had a whole bunch of them. We can name like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and the current one. And, that's about it. We think real hard. We can name 5 or 6 more. What about all those other guys that were presidents? See, nobody cares. There have been millionaires going all the way back to, I'll say, the beginning of time, at least on their current standards. We don't even know who they were. They died. They were in the grave. They turned back to dust. They were totally forgotten. And if they weren't right with their maker when they left, none of it matters. So when we doubt God's power, remember, he's not so much looking at my agenda. He's looking at his. And his is, he's got a child. point your finger at yourself, that he's trying to get home. And it's a little hard to get our brain around, but in the Psalms he said, blessed are the death of the saints, because it's a homecoming. And then we forget he's the potter, we're the clay. It's just so easy to forget that. So we're going to push back against this doubt. So again, reflect on past events and look how things worked out, how God worked them out, and how maybe if you'd got the path you chose, life would have been real ugly. And those are kind of interesting to reflect upon if you can identify some of the forks in the road where you didn't get to go the way you wanted. And then immerse yourself in the scriptures again, Matthew 4:4. Adjust your perspective. God's bigger than any problem we face, so there's no need to doubt it. He knows what's going on. He's got it. He's got it. It just may be, let's use death as the example, it just may be, it's my time to leave this life. He gets to pick that. I don't. And some of us, if we've got to pick when it was our time to leave this world, we would never, ever, ever, ever leave. We'd stay forever because we're afraid of the unknown. And then you got to get into the paradox of this, and this probably ought to be a whole other lesson, right? This is when Paul is praying to have the thorn in his flesh removed. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. When we're doubting God's power, he knows what he's doing. And one of the things he's teaching us is not to trust in our flesh, but to trust in his power, because it's going to be perfected, his power, in our weakness. And then we just get tired. We get tired, we get worn down, we get fatigued. You know how kids get when they get tired and they get cranky and they don't want to go to bed, but they need to go to bed, and they just get really hard to deal with. And adults do it too. We just do it on a little different way. We're not as overt throwing our tantrums. And so we wear out. We're tired. We get impatient with people, and our defenses are low, and we get kind of snappy and cranky about things. And just gotta, okay, I'm human. I'm at my limit. I've gone as far as I can go. It's time to go to bed. Now, isn't it funny that somewhere after 50 or 60, when you go, it's time to go to bed, you're going, yeah, it's bedtime. Let me go to sleep. So Paul knew all this was going to happen. He said, don't lose heart in doing good. In due time, you'll reap if you don't grow weary. Don't give up. Don't get too depressed. Keep your focus, because the temptation to quit can come right before one of the biggest breakthroughs. I love the story about the old gold miner. He had his little thing, his little mine. He was working and working and working. He finally just said, this mine's never going to work. So he sold it to somebody else. And a foot later, they hit the mother lode. It's like, that's the way life works, huh? Life is putting you to the test, and it is going to put you through all the paces to see if you really, really want it. Brief story. It's a secular story, but Steve Harvey's one of the speakers I like to listen to. And of course, you think of Steve Harvey today, and you think of this, he's a great, awesome comedian. He's a wonderful television personality. He just has that personality on camera that just goes like, he'd be so much fun to hang out with. Listen to him tell his story sometime. He lived in his car for 3 years trying to get his breakthrough. He tells the story about how he would sneak into places so he could take a sink bath because all he had was his car. And he'd have to sneak in, and then he'd have to, put everything on pause when somebody else came in. And it's really funny the way he tells it. And yet, had he quit, we would never know who Steve Harvey was. But because he had that crazy determination that I'm going to make this work no matter what, and life said, prove it to me. Prove you really want it. And if you listen to his stories, which I need to be clear. Now and then he says a word that you and I wouldn't say. Now, he's not way over the top, but, if you don't want to hear a bad word ever, don't listen to Steve Harvey. But if you don't mind a little colorful language here and there, his story is awesome. But he said he had his turn back moment. He said he had his moment where he called his folks and said, I'm done. Can I come live in the basement? And they said, no. And he kept going. And now we know who Steve Harvey is. Now, don't quit too often. Don't give up too quick. The breakthrough may be 3 years away, But if you give up 3 years away, you'll still be what you were. So somebody said, well, I'd go to college. By the time I graduate, for me, I'd be 71. The response to that is, okay, how old will you be in 4 years if you don't go to college? Oh, I'll still be 71. Okay, do you want to be 71 without a college degree or with a college degree? Or your whatever goal. Pick your goal. Don't quit too soon. So times of weariness. Jesus is our example. He knew what it was like. Considered him who endured such hostility by sinners against himself so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. He would get so tired he could sleep in a boat in the middle of a storm. Our weariness is real. You need to acknowledge it. You need to manage it. You need to learn what you can do to help manage it. But it's not the end. It's not the end. And I'm watching the clock because there's another area I love to dabble in. At my house, we call it voodoo. And if you'll come to my house, I'll open the vitamin cabinet for you. And you'll look at me and go, oh, you take all of that? I absolutely do. Why? Because it's part of managing the physical changes that happen over the years. You get a youngster like Archer, you get a youngster like Reese, they're like, they're going all the time. You get to hit Matta's age, she's pushing 18, she's like, okay, I'm done. You get our age, we're like, I'm done. There are things you can do to manage all of this stuff. But you got to own it. And you just got to be brutally honest with yourself and go, okay, I ain't 18 anymore. My mind thinks I'm 18. My body thinks I'm stupid. So you just learn these things. Now, if you want to get really caught up in the rabbit hole and go down with me to Alice and the rabbit hole and all that stuff, we'll talk about how to manage your mitochondria and things you can take. And we'll just have a wonderful time, or I'll bore you to death. But fatigue is normal. You're human. It's always going to happen. I don't care if you're as young as that one or middle-ish, still young like that one. Who can I point out for middle age without getting in trouble? Middle age. Jeff, are you still middle age? Okay, so Jeff's middle age. And then we get to be senior. And it's just normal. There's nothing wrong. You just learn to go, okay, I'm tired. I need to quit before I do something stupid. Jesus experienced it. He understood it. So we're going to just keep working on it. This is part of refining what we do. We are the gold in the crucible. It's not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. He said, don't be surprised when fiery ordeals come among you, which comes upon you for your, look at that, upon you for your testing. It's all training, and we get tested in the process. So in times of weariness, be honest with yourself. Just be really brutally honest with yourself. Find your strength in your church family. Look to God. He gives strength to the weary, Isaiah 40:29. Look to eternity, because this body isn't the only thing we've got. And weariness doesn't make you a failure. So you're tired. Okay. Take a nap. And there's nothing wrong with a little nap in the afternoon. I heartily endorse that. So acting the fool, that's not the final chapter. We're works in progress. We just, see a stumble as an invitation to see something wrong. It's an invitation to move up a little higher. And just keep looking at the Lord's loving kindness. It never ceases. His compassions never fail. They're new every morning. Problem's not with God. The problem is I get entangled in my flesh, and then I miss it. If you're not on the straight and narrow road, our baptistry is ready. We're here to help any way we can while together we stand and sing.